Okay, everybody's starting to come in. Take just a second for the live folks to get all up to speed. Okay. Thanks everybody for coming for our bi-weekly webinars. This is for this Tuesday. We've got our first returning co-host. We're gonna talk with James Clay in just a moment. His first session was extremely popular and very well received. So this is his second one, and we're hoping we'll be able to set something up in the future for a few more with James, because it's been very good. I think you're going to all enjoy this topic as well. So the first thing I want to do is is to welcome everybody. Thanks for coming. I know we're all motorsports people, and we wish we were out at the track, but these kind of things are just super powerful for everybody, and we're all learning a ton. So hopefully everybody is enjoying these. We have some folks that are going to be joining us from AIM and elsewhere that are here to answer some questions and answers in the answer box, the question box that you guys are able to type into. We're going to go through and have these guys introduce themselves really quickly, so you know who's going to be answering your questions. And we'll start with Robbie out of our California office. Oops, Robbie, are you hear me? Oops, Rob, there
Yes.
you go, Robbie. There you go.
I just wanted to say hello and welcome. We've all been having a great time hosting these webinars for you and just getting our experience to you. And this seems to be a great medium. So thanks for stopping by, everyone. Perfect.
Thank you, Robbie. Cameron, back over in our Roanoke office. Give us a little bit about you, Cameron.
Yeah. You know, like I said, or like Robbie said, we're just happy to be able to connect with everybody while we can. Hopefully everyone's out there staying safe and healthy. We're looking forward to getting back into the racing season, hopefully sooner rather than later. So thanks everybody for coming, and got an exciting topic here.
Perfect. Corey is a new addition to the crew this weekend for this session. Corey, tell us a little bit extra about you. A little bit about who you are, how long you've worked for AIM, where you work, and kind of the things that you do for AIM.
Hey, Roger, thanks for having me. So I just started just a little under a year ago, so I'm still busy building the foundation. Just started with all the go-kart applications and trying to work into the automotive applications of things. Really glad you guys let me come along, and excited to get started.
Perfect. Corey's doing a great job. I hear good things from folks that I chat with that have been working with Corey as well. So thank you for being here, Corey.
Yes, sir. Thanks for having me.
Emiliano is with us all the way from Milan, Italy. It's almost bedtime for the folks over there. But Emiliano, tell us a little bit about yourself and how you're going to help us here today.
Hello from Italy. It's almost dinner time instead of bedtime. Yeah, but anyway, I work for AIM since 20 years today, and I develop software, and I'm here to help if I can. Perfect.
Thank you very much. And you underestimate how old I am and that I like to go to bed just after dinner. So no, exactly. Perfect. And then yeah, let me share something different here. Oops. Let's see if we can get back to where I want to go. Let's see, let's share a different screen and share this. I had it on the wrong slide for where I wanted to start. So we'll do, oops, there we go. I'm going to introduce our co-host today, James Clay. We've got James will tell us a little bit more about himself, but here's a little bit of a slide about James and his company, Bimmer World. James, again, as I mentioned a second ago, this is our second webinar with James. He talked about how to use the AIM software and the AIM data to talk about the time compare bar and looking, and he went through a lap with a couple of different drivers, a faster driver and a slow driver, or a pro driver and the customer, the person being coached, and he walked us through some of that data with and understanding how to use the time compare bar. And he's going to do something even a little bit more in depth here today. And James, what are you going to explain today? And tell us a little bit about you. You are muted, James. If you want to unmute yourself.
There we go.
There you go.
Sorry about that. So a little bit about me. I've been doing this, as the slide says, since '97. I've been driving with data since '97, '98, something like that. I got the opportunity to use data very early on in the world of data, and it's just helped me progress tremendously as a driver. And so it's kind of always my foundation when I'm at the track. And I'm at the track 150 days a year-ish, and every one of those days the data is on running, and every session gets analyzed and dug through to see what we can learn, because if we're not out there learning, we're just burning up lots of money for tourism.
Track time is expensive. We need to get as much out of it as we can, as fast as we can, right?
That's right.
So I'm going to share share back to Ray Studio 2. I'm going to give James control of the mouse. He'll talk a little bit about where what we're going to chat about today, and then get started and jump in. So the computer is yours, James.
Okay, good deal. Thank you. So yeah, today we're going to talk about slope or track elevation, or basically what happens when the track goes up and down. For those of you familiar with tracks on the East Coast, this is, of course, VIR. VIR is my home track, so that it helps that I know every nook and cranny of that track. But it's also just a fantastic track through rolling hills of Virginia, and has some really challenging turns and challenging sectors that are linked. And the longer the sector becomes, the more things that are linked to it. Track position matters, and using every inch of that track is important. And then just as much as using every inch of that track, using every feature of that track. And certainly elevation plays a part of that. And I think VIR is a very three-dimensional track. So when Roger asked me what I wanted to talk about, or what I wanted to work on, this is one of these things that I kind of keep in my back pocket. And it seems like when I work with drivers and coaching and so forth, people are thinking about some of the basics, but I think there's as always with data, multiple layers, and you can certainly dive deeper into specifically how the rise and fall of that piece of asphalt is affecting the handling performance of your car and what you're doing as a driver.
Exactly, and some of the stuff that we're going to talk today are seriously GPS-based channels for the most part. We're going to jump into maybe show a little bit of brake pressure or throttle positions or something like that. And because of that, I'd like to start a quick poll that talks about the pieces of equipment that everybody is using. There's the stuff we're going to talk about today is certainly has the ability to be done with a Solo 2, and even the channels that James will get in a little bit deeper, maybe a Solo DL where it's connected to an ECU. But for the most part, everything he's going to talk about today, any of these GPS-based channels as he goes, will be part of a standard Solo that James talks about he carries in his backpack when he goes to every track. So everybody's voting. I appreciate that. Any of the devices you happen to use, it's great if you let us know what those are. These polls, we're going to do 3 or 4 of them today as the time goes on, and they really help us understand what our next few topics are going to be. So I appreciate everybody taking the time to click on the polls. It's been up there for almost a minute now, so we're going to go ahead and end that at this point, and then go ahead and slide that back over to James and have him talk about the GPS-based channels, and then where do we go once we're at the track and we have our AIM device in. So go ahead, James.
Okay, so this is a lap around VIR. I think we're going to analyze 4 different sectors of the track today, and as a driver, I like to think sequentially my way around the track. So we're going to start with the entry of turn 1 as one of these points to analyze. But I will say, as we look at this, this is more on the nuance side of things than one of the bigger or better examples maybe a little bit later on in the lap. This is one that once you start thinking of that track three-dimensionally, that's a skill that will pay off in more than just a couple of corners that you initially it stood out on. And then certainly it's something that I now think about over so many tracks, and specifically now we're talking about the elevation and slope, but you could also be thinking about this as in track surface or something like that, because just like we'll talk about turn one and a braking zone and what happens to the track in that braking zone, that could also be a piece of polished pavement that you run through on your way through a braking zone or similar. So anyway, as I dig into this, so we are going to start at turn one. This is, let's see, there we go. It's a little bit of a delay. So this is the run into turn one and the braking zone for turn one. Roger's thrown up the GPS slope here, which shows what the track is doing. The track, as we go down the straight, is kind of around this 0 line. It's just staying steady, and then it starts falling as we're entering our braking zone. This is the application of the brakes. To make this a little bit more clear, I'm going to also go ahead and throw up the brake pressure.
While you're doing that, James,
again,
let me explain real quickly for people that haven't looked at that GPS slope question very much, or data trace. 0 would be the track is level. It's flat as you're coming in, as it is right at the left edge of the screen here. It's near 0, and when it goes into a negative number, you're going slightly downhill, and the bigger that number is, the steeper you're going downhill. So here you can see it's about 1 degree downhill right when the brakes are being applied, and then partway through, right towards the end of the braking, which James is going to get to in a minute, it actually comes back up. Not only flattens out, but actually goes a little bit uphill right at the end. So just trying to make sure everybody understands that GPS slope data trace. Okay.
Perfect. And as we look at laps, Roger, early on, you'd said it's a fast driver, a slow driver. It's it's 2 different laps. It's an A and a B. Basically, it's just 2 laps for comparison. And I think, in general, this analysis is the pink driver is the driver that's driving a 3-dimensional track, and the blue driver is one that's more thinking about this as a little bit more of a 2-dimensional track. And that being said, this is just 2 laps that we snagged. I'm not going to say these are optimized, but they certainly show what we're looking for. So as we're coming into the braking zone of turn one, the pink driver does slow a little bit early, but the brake trace, typically I would like to see a brake trace that comes into the brake. And again, how hard you come into the brake depends on what kind of car you're driving. You can't shock the front tires as you're coming into it, or overwhelm the ABS. That's not going to be helpful. But there's a ramp into the brakes. There is a threshold once the car is loaded into the braking zone, and then typically there's a fade, decrease, trail brake as turning starts to happen, and so forth. I would say that this blue trace follows, for the most part, a fairly typical braking trace, with the minor point that this little peak here is probably maybe an oops, I'm a little too fast, so slowed it down there. Versus the pink trace. The pink trace is one to me that shows better use of the 3-dimensional piece of this track. So like I said, as you come into this braking zone at VIR, it's brake as the track is falling, which we see right here as the slope is below, or GPS slope is below 0, and then at some point the track starts to level out or come back up to you. So the pink driver begins to apply more brake pressure at the point that the track is coming back up, loading the tires more heavily, and giving the car more braking ability. And ultimately, if the pink driver had hit the brakes at the same point or even deeper, we can see that sliver of speed here. And we could, using last week's version, we could certainly see what that little sliver is worth. But I don't want to get stuck in the minutia of that. We know it's worth something to be going faster, deeper into the braking zone. So what allows us to do that is reading that that GPS slope. This stuff is like an onion, and we've talked about that. We've started to peel down the onion and really kind of get to the inside of it. I recognize the audience for this webinar is kind of broad, so I'm gonna give you a little bit of a snippet that's pretty deep into the onion, and you can certainly dive as deep as you want to, and there's certainly opportunities to learn how to go deeper into it. But as Roger and I were talking about this and preparing for the webinar, I said, it's interesting because it's not really that the track is happens to be at a lower elevation or that I can see that it's an uphill. It's a matter of when it changes to become uphill, when it stops falling and begins loading. Even though maybe I haven't started to go uphill yet, I've begun loading the car. I said it's, as an engineer, it's kind of it's more of the rate of change. It's a derivative. And so, of course, Roger, being the expert that he is, said, okay, I can create the derivative and show you that rate of change and show you that right here is when the slope actually changes, and that starts to line up with what our driver is feeling. So now it's not just the elevation of the track, it's that change in elevation of the track, and the change in elevation is really what's loading the car and allows us to go deeper. So that's pretty deep into the onion. What do you think, Roger?
Yeah, exactly. And the way that you do that, if you give me the mouse back just for a second, and this is something we're going to go into down the road in another couple of webinars. But here is that slope speed. We can see. Oops. Let me double click on that. Oops. It's slope speed. It's fighting me a little bit on showing the correct one. But what we're really doing is taking the it's locked up on me. Won't let me out of here. That's interesting. Yikes. Oh, there it goes finally. What we're looking at is the slope speed. What we just did is we took the derivative of the slope itself. So it's the slope, and I've seen a couple of other questions as we were going. One of them, number one, this is in degrees. So 1 degree down or 5 degrees down, and we're going to see some areas where it's much steeper up and down a little bit later in the lap that James is going to work to. Like he mentioned, this is a pretty small one, but he'll find some other areas. And then so I don't want to rescale this so you can see it even more, but that would be why. And the other question I see somebody ask is, how can this be different, in this part here? And yeah, number one, it's GPS derived slope, and so there is a little bit of there's a possibility of a little bit of error there, but even almost always, even more so, is if the driver has taken a different line, while it might be steeper here because he's actually driving down the banking. So it's actually a little bit steeper downhill right here because he's actually on a different line on the part of the corner. It's more so that than even GPS error, which is why we see this difference right in this area. So did want to just chat about that for a quick second as James was kind of finishing up on this one here. I think we'll see a little bit of that in some of the stuff to come as well. So
Roger, and on that point, could it also be, since it is GPS based and the unit is in the car, can it also be the pitch, the dive and squat of the car affecting the degrees?
Especially if it's a different car and we've got one of them, the GPS sensor is back over the rear trunk, and one of them is a solo up ahead of the center of the car. It is dropping and the back is coming up depending on where you place the antenna. If this happened to be both spec E46s and they've had them both in the same spot, you won't see that as much, but you'll see some of that in where you place the antenna in a much different spot. Good point.
Copy that.
Okay, James, go ahead. Should be able
Okay,
to click on it
also
and then go.
to the questions over there, we're talking about time gained and lost, and you know, I'm happy to show it, but I think it's to the point of the analysis that we're doing. We're really focusing on driver inputs. You know, I think we can. I think it may muddy the waters because I know that the driver, the pink driver, lost time by not going as deep into the braking zone. I know there's a sliver of time gained here. This is a little bit different approach. The pink driver slowed the car ultimately a little bit more and a little bit earlier to get on the throttle earlier. But those are, you know, some of those things are a little bit outside the scope of the topic that we're talking about today. So
and we covered that deeply a week ago in that in the time compare bar video. So if anybody wants to dig into that a little bit deeper, go watch it's the same exact data. Go watch that that video from a week ago on YouTube.
Cool. I'm going to get back out to the full lap in an ideal world here. Seem to have a little bit of a lag today.
It's
Yeah,
acting up a bit. Let me try it here. Let me see if I can get you back out a little bit. There you go.
All right, great. All right. The next place I want to talk about is the Uphill Oasis. One of these fantastic features of VIR. Depending on the car you're driving, it's usually a goal to be able to go through the Uphill S's flat, or that would be the first goal. You know, if I have, you know, a spec Miata, I'll be going through the Uphill S's flat. If I have a spec E46, it's maybe a little bit more challenging, but I'll go through the Uphill S's flat. If I have, you know, a Corvette with, you know, a stock type car, more power than grip, so that's not my goal. But for a lot of the cars that that I see raced, you know, the 80%, going through their flat is a goal. But then after you achieve that, and going ahead and saying that most cars can, or even if you're one of those cars, the faster cars that can't, there's the next goal. The next goal is, as so many of the turns at VIR are linked together, is going through the Uphill S's flat, but at the very top of the Uphill S's, leaving myself in a position that I can then take the braking zone and next left-hand turn, turn 10, where there's very little time between, and certainly not enough time to set up exactly where you would choose to by driving there. You have to pre-plan where you're going to be on the track, and it's going to be a factor of how you take those Uphill S's. So again, Uphill S's, they're left, right, rolling up the track, but they're also up and down. And I think usually people get so stuck in that left, right. And I'm going to go ahead and throw the lat Excel on here as well. This is roughly the entrance. We start thinking about the left, right of it, and forget about what's going on with the up and down. I'm going to also remove brake pressure because that's not super important here. And let's see, what other piece did we have on here yesterday, Roger?
Probably longitudinal, so they can see where the braking is. The right where the cursor's at, you can see the GPS slope is just starting to go up, and that's where he's going to kind of focus on, is that, boy, we've been floating up the uphill S's, but it's only slightly uphill, and all of a sudden, right here at the end, it starts to really climb.
We have.
That's the
I'm going to use my
right there.
Yeah, I'm going to use my my three-dimensional driver here is going to be my blue driver. So now my blue driver is the one that's thinking about this track in a very three-dimensional way, versus my pink driver is kind of more the standard. You know, if I just saw this overview that we're seeing in the GPS, just the straight overhead view, when the track goes left, I'll turn left, and you know, vice versa. So what's happening here? So this is the start of the Uphill S's, where we are turning left. Now we're turning right. Am I right about that?
Yep. You're right. Positives are right, negatives are left.
Turning right about right here. So again, we're looking at this GPS slope. The track is coming up to us. What does that mean? It means that you've got much more compression in the car and much more ability to load the car. So, you know, in the early days of DE, you're told that I want to gently steer in, hold, and very slowly unwind the wheel of the car. When I go through the Uphill S's at full speed, it feels a bit more like a boxing match. I'm yanking and now here and maybe that's a little bit exaggerated, but not so exaggerated. And what allows us? Well, the fact that the track just climbed on me 2 degrees in this section, which allows me ultimately more grip and the ability to load the car more heavily. So if I can get through the Uphill S's by turning left, right, and I can end up at the top, my goal at the top is to be as far right as possible. So that means that I need to, with a sequence of turns, I need to be able to hit each one as late as possible. With the top turn being a right-hander, it would be my goal to apex that one fairly late and to be able to hold the right side of the track. So that means to apex that one late means that I need to apex every one before it a little bit late so I can build up that buffer. If you start, you know, on the other end of things, if you start apexing early through a sequence of turns, it's only going to get worse as you go. So to apex late, that means that I need to take full control, full turning ability of that car in those moments that I can take it. So as the track is rising up right here, I'm going to turn very hard, almost a stab to get as much turning done as possible. Same thing in the left. There's a part here that the track is not doing anything. It's flattened off, so and feels like it's falling. It looks like it's just flattened off though. So can't get as much turning done. The next place we really load it is where that slope changes. And again, if we go back to that
slope speed,
there you go. We go back to the slope speed. Where that slope starts ramping in is exactly where this blue driver gives it that stab, takes the full grip of the car with that loading to control the car, to maximize the turning grip and the track position of the car.
Yeah, because the track is there to give him a little bit more. It's almost like you've thrown a big Aero 8 on it, right? You've thrown a big wing or a big front splitters or something, and all of a sudden you've just got more grip because it's there and available for you. And it's hard to see that sometimes from the driver's seat out the windshield. You're not understanding fully the slope of the roadway. So once you start to play with the data in these ways, it becomes a little bit easier to see. What I'd like to do is launch another poll real quickly as to get everybody thinking about what kind of forms of motorsports do you use that are using these. Of course, we're giving some road racing racing examples here. Love to know what your experience is, how you use these devices in your motorsports world. Even though we're talking about road racing here, the same concepts are going to apply whether it's in karting or motorcycles on road racing, or even on oval track, forms of racing. The reading the track and being able to see certain things like this is very helpful that James is sharing with us today. So you can pick. I think you can pick multiples of this one. Maybe it's just one. But go ahead and pick the one that you generally are working with, and maybe add a second one if you're also looking at it. So perfect. We're approaching about a minute, and I'd like to end that polling, and I'd like to go ahead and share this one and give everybody an idea of who's in the audience that we're chatting with. Of course, we're using these polls. We study these polls, the days after, and continue to try to adjust what we're looking at and who we're working with and creating these webinars for. So I'm going to stop sharing that, and James is going to, let me move that over out of the way a little bit. James, we're coming up on an area where there is a big change in the speed or the change of the slope. It's not only going, downhill, but it's going downhill. It starts to really roll down and then starts to roll the other way in the area that you're about to go to. So let's finish this uphill S's, and then let me bring this out just a little bit so everybody can see where you're at. The uphill S's and heading towards Oak Tree Corner. Go ahead.
And to address a couple of the questions on the chat, and especially given that we've got 10% motorcycle guys on here, and thanks for being here. We're not so much factoring in the curbs, which certainly could be a little bit of a factor, but we're taking kind of the accurate, given that I know the driver and the style of both of these laps, that we're not really we're not factoring in a different line and different use of the curb. Again, I'm thinking, or what we're talking about right now is more that slope, and certainly there's a whole different discussion on what happens if you're on a curb and the resulting camber loss of the curb, etc. But for bike guys and car guys alike, what we're talking about now is kind of the rise and fall of the track itself. Also, one of the questions David asks is some of this knowledge gained from track walks. I'll tell you, when we're talking about rise and fall of the track, absolutely you see that. You see the camber gains from the track walks. And if you're a runner or bicyclist, you've never, it will absolutely cement in your brain as you run the track or ride the track and struggle up these things that didn't feel like the track was rising, but on the back straight, when you're done with the back straight, you realize that you've run uphill the whole way. So absolutely, you can gain that knowledge from that experience.
Perfect.
Yeah, so to get back to the data, and what we're talking about in the uphill S's is, again, all this leading up to that final right-hander, which is here, and then our ability to maximize speed through the left-hander. Maximize speed through the left-hander because we set up on the right side of the track as far as possible and maximized our radius of that turn. So again, my blue driver is the one that's thought about this whole piece three-dimensionally. So it hasn't really paid off through here. Again, if we'd been looking at that time slip or running losses, we'd see pretty minimal difference between the two drivers up to this point. Here's where it starts to pay off. And in this car or in this day or whatever, we're not talking about flat through the uphill S's. We still have to give it a little bit of a breathe through that right-hander, which is pretty typical. That's where you would breathe off. But you're seeing, because of position on track, and we'll zoom in on that GPS here and see if we can.
There you go.
Again, the latency. There we go.
And while he's doing that, the one he was looking at there a minute ago was throttle position. It's called pedal position in the channel names here, but that's throttle position he's looking at. There you go. And now when you click in the main window, James, it'll kind of center itself as you go the rest of the way in the S's. So.
Copy that. It's to some good degree, and I apologize for that. I don't use the GPS that much. I just I've used this stuff enough, and I see the squiggly lines, and I know exactly what that means. But it's a great way to visualize, know where you are on track. But when you question what that line difference is, you can visually see it. If you look at this, this is what I'm talking about with the blue driver able to maintain a later apex, and all the way through that sequence. So through that last left-hander in the uphill S's, they're able to hold track left further, and that gives them a better look around the corner of the last right-hander. And that look around the corner is what makes that driver confident that, okay, I can go ahead and add throttle here. And this is waiting for this thing to catch up. We're showing about a mile different there.
Yeah, coming up on 2.
Yep. One pokey thing. Anyway, there we go. Yep, 2 miles an hour. 2 miles an hour difference through that top bit, and then carries through the braking zone for the left-hander and all the way through that. So I will come up and let's see. Where's our time slip?
You let me have it. I'll green it for you. Options and settings and show time compare bar.
And that time compare bar is something that I leave on there constantly. And so I always just have it on when I'm doing data analysis. Roger and I spoke about specifically removing it just because it does maybe muddy the water a little bit on some of the stuff we're talking about today. So
it is the technology. It's not the software. It's the technology of the web meeting. If web meeting is fighting us, it's not letting me choose it. So the time gain would have been 3 or 4 tenths at that spot, right?
Right. Yep. So it is worth the time. Absolutely, it's worth the time, and you can see that you get better grip out of the car. You're able to hold, reach a higher peak lateral G, and then able to hold that properly if you're working with the track going up and down. And then again, the payoff is all the way through here. All right, so I'm done with that section. Unless you have other comments, Roger, I'm going to move on to the next.
You're good.
All right, so that section is about linking turns. It's about using the rise of the track, the additional grip to turn, and especially through a link section of turns, how to maximize that. Early on, we talked about turn 1, which is using the rise of the track to brake. Now the next thing is going to be to shift. So this again is a little bit of a nuance, but I think it's an important one. If you look coming out of Oak Tree, so we're exiting Oak Tree, we have 2 drivers driving a very similar speed. They both click that, the car's in 3rd gear now, we click that 3rd to 4th gear shift as indicated by the pedal position. This is a manual car, so there's going to be some amount of time off throttle. Without digging into that too deeply, it's going to be about 3/10 of a second that the driver is off throttle during that shift. And so and there's an optimum point to shift. If in general, if you look through the lap, the drivers are shifting, maybe not always at the right time as you look onto the front straight, but probably at about the same RPM. This car has a dash, an aim dash with shift lights that's saying 6250, shift there. This car has a rev limiter of about 6,500, but makes more of its power on the lower end. So, if I can shift at 62, 6250, that's where I'm going to do it every single time. But, and again, this is my blue driver that's paying attention to what's going on the track. So we're shifting the same place in my 3rd to 4th gear shift. And this is while the track is staying pretty much flat. There's a bit of a rise here, but it's staying pretty flat. But then suddenly, as you'll see on the back straight of VIR, it's kind of a series of plateaus. So it's flat, and then suddenly we're climbing up a hill. So if I'm gonna coast, if I'm gonna take my foot off the throttle in a car, not engage the transmission, which is essentially what you're doing when you're shifting, even if it's only for a very small amount of time, I would much rather do that when I'm not fighting gravity. If I could do my shifting on a downhill, absolutely, because I'd have gravity working to move that car even when the engine's not engaged. I'd rather do it at a flat place in the track than I would an uphill. Uphill is the absolute worst place. I'm disengaging my engine as I'm trying to climb this hill. So that's what we're seeing in the data here. I'm going to zoom in a little bit more. So my pink driver, foot off throttle at about, let's see, I need to pull my GPS back, or I'm sorry, my RPM back up here.
There you go. 6356, it looks
there
like.
There we go. 6356, so a little higher than normal, but that's probably what we're working with. But the blue driver,
he waited
cranks
a little
that
longer.
thing all the way up to 64, 66. That'll continue to climb just a little bit. That's going to be almost as that car is banging the rev limiter. Why is that? Because again, to our GPS slope trace, we're climbing a hill. The track is continuing to rise there, and so I'm going to lose a little speed when I shift going up a hill. When I disengage the engine going up a hill, I would rather lose as little as possible and delay that to as absolutely late as possible, to as late as the engine will allow me. If I had a different car with a little bit different RPM range or a different run out or whatever I had, if I could shift in this section, which is pretty, the F30 ST cars that I used to drive, this was our typical shift point for them. So it was wait just until you got over the rise, then click that shift. So now you're not working against gravity, it's working for you when you have time off throttle.
Perfect. That experience level of not only experience at VIR and in certain cars, but using the data, right, and using what we're looking at here is allows us to see those kind of things. Let me start another poll here really quickly, and it's talking about experience level of using aimsports hardware and software. These are this is a one only kind of a question, and I know it's not perfect. Some of you aren't using it every day or whatever, but it gives us a pretty good idea. One of the things that I'm going to slide this over just a little bit. The remaining little section of that track, while I'm going to turn off a couple things just for fun. Once the driver, the pink driver, shifted just a little bit early, and while that doesn't look like it makes a ton of difference, but in the speed tracer, if you look a little bit farther down the road, that while he was about the same, maybe just middle of the previous one, they were within a 0.2 miles per hour. And then by the little bit earlier shift and getting it done while it was on the flats before it was up the hill, boy, when after that shift and just before the braking zone, we're talking a full mile per hour faster there, and the difference happened here where you can see where that shift happened, and just experience and knowing the track, knowing the car, and of course being able to look in the data is a big piece of that. We've been talking on that poll for about a minute there. Let's end that polling and let's share that with everybody to give you an idea of who's here, and everybody can take a look at who's here. We've got brand new users. The largest group right there is 1 year to 2 years, and the bulk of our people that have been watching these webinars, and probably more or less true here again, is that brand new user up to 2 or 3 years old, out there trying to learn as much as you can about the software. So that's pretty cool. That experience level is what James is sharing with us here a little bit, which is kind of nice. James, that ability to do that right at that flat spot really seems to help cars. This particular one especially, because the RPM limit falls right in that area where it kind of was flat and just before it goes up. But we see that in many different kinds of cars, not just this car. And in the upper gears especially, it sometimes shifting early is the better thing to do. And we can see that. I know you wrote an article on this, on shift speeds just recently, using the clutch correctly, an article that's out there on Grassroots Motorsports. I'm not sure if it's linked from your website or not. So so that was very, very cool to play with. So I'll turn that back over to you. You can turn on a couple of the channels back on if you wish, and continue on to that last corner where I know you really focus on it.
Okay, and I'll see if I can get zoomed out here. And while that happens, there we go. A couple of these questions. Greg asked at Road America specifically, would I shift at the bottom of the hill coming out of turn 15 onto the front straight? And that's even a better indicator, I think. And I'll tell you, I think that's one that you can obviously feel, right? I don't know how much the elevation climbs at that track at that point. It's got to be 100 feet plus. But if the first car I ever drove at Road America was a Spec Miata, and I shifted halfway up the hill, and then I not only decelerated as I was shifting, but continued to decelerate the rest of the way up the hill. And I learned in that car that you just let it bang off the rev limiter and then shift at the flat up the top. Versus our F30, like to be shifted around 6,000 RPMs. Absolutely, I would go ahead and shift that thing at 55 and go ahead and build the boost before I climb that hill in that specific section. So yeah, absolutely, you're on the right track on how to think about this, and then you'll start narrowing down the nuance of when we think about this. If the track is only just rising 20 feet,
and looking at data just exactly like we're looking at here, their acceleration rates with the slope, even if you didn't notice it on the track as much, certainly post data analysis, you would be able to see that and pick that up pretty quickly.
And specifically on the S's, a couple of guys ask about, is there a compression point on each one of those turns. For that track, there is for the first right-hander, and there is for the next left-hander, and it's more of those two. And in fact, the left-hander is both a compression point and it cambers up a little bit. So we do take advantage of both of those features of the track. And then, which then follows to the next question, well, what about the fall? And the reason that you have to be so ahead of yourself in those uphill S's is right as you're starting to apex the last of the uphill S's, the right-hander, where you're going through the fastest as you continue to accelerate up the hill. The track does begin to fall, and it's not so much the gaining grip now, it's the loss of grip and trying to manage the loss in grip, and you just have to make sure that you are you've already positioned your car, you've already got it pointed where you want it pointed, and if that means setting a slip angle, you do that back here when you have the grip to do it, because once you reach the point that the track starts falling, you're kind of a little bit along for the ride. So absolutely, that's how you think about the slope, and it's not only the positives that you gain in the compression, it's the negatives that you lose when you're not in compression, and just you're going to be having less grip and less control of the car, and generally a straighter wheel at those times.
Perfect.
All right, the last piece that we're going to look at here is a little bit more of just a static piece. I say a static piece, a steady state turn. And this is the turn, it's a little bit of a sequence, but the piece I'm talking about is the right-hander at the bottom of the last part of the hill as we go onto the front straight. And certainly at some point there is a compression zone. I'm going to move the cursor over so I can zoom in. All right. And GPS slope, we talked about this a little bit earlier. How can it be different? I think in this, it's pretty typical to bang that curve pretty hard, and potentially get some air there. And I think that maybe we're seeing
it's
disruption there.
Yep.
So the data is a great tool. You also need to know what it's telling you, or what it also might be indicating. It's not just that this driver found a line that suddenly is this much different. It's that there was a track feature there that probably caused that. Again, I'm going to use my blue driver as my indicator of somebody that's thinking about the track three-dimensionally. We're a little off pace with the pink here, so I'm not as worried about that. But as I focus on purely what the blue driver is doing here, there is a, let's see here. Sorry about that. I'm going to add my lat G's back so we can see the the turn here. So there is a transition point where we go from turning left to turning right. So that happens, and then there's a pause as the track continues to fall, and then right at this point, the driver picks up a little bit of throttle. Sneak that cursor a little bit over to the right. The driver picks up a little bit of pedal, and that pedal is added not only right at the max of the lat G's, but right as the track starts to come back up. So again, right as we start to get the compression, right as we start to get the added grip, my driver that's driving a three-dimensional track says, well, and both do actually, says, okay, time to start sneaking into that pedal. And then
as the slope really starts to come up, they start to get after it even more.
Right, exactly. And I think we had a better example of that earlier of when it was exactly time, and maybe that was adding that slope speed there. Yeah, as the slope speed kind of hits max, that's where it's full commitment time and time to go down the road.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting also to look at, if I move this over just a little bit out of the way, you can see the RPM on, and especially the blue one, the driver tried to get after the throttle right where it was at the the GPS slope had not given up enough of it yet, and you can see the RPM climb real quickly, and then has to come back down because he got after the throttle a little bit and felt that tire, that inside tire, probably slipping just a little bit on grip. Had to wait a minute, and then you can see it, RPM actually comes down as the slope is climbing and punching that the back of the car down into the track. So it's kind of interesting there as well.
Awesome. A couple of these questions. Let's see, the formula for GPS slope. What is your? That is a math channel, and you tried to pull that up earlier, and we were getting fought by the Zoom meeting a little bit on that.
The GPS slope is actually a channel that is provided by all of any AIM data logger that has a GPS sensor. It is just a natural channel. It's always there. The one that is a math channel is where we tried to take the derivative of GPS slope and see how quickly the numbers of degrees per second that the slope was changing. And that is a math channel, and it's something that we will get into in a future webinar. If anybody wants a little bit more information on that, I've got some a math channel package that I email out to a lot of people. You're going to see my email address here at the end, and if you just write me an email note at the end and send me, hey Roger, what about that math channel package? I'll email that out to anybody that asks for it. So.
And that GPS slope, yes, is the derivative, is the rate of change. And to Michael's question, from the 14,400 point to the 14,800 is continuously falling, but falling in different rates. So again, I don't care so much that the track is falling out from under me. If it suddenly starts falling less than it was falling, then I add grip to my tires.
Perfect.
That's what I've got, Roger.
Okay, perfect. That kind of finishes up the lap a little bit. The whole point of the 3 dimensions, and I seen a question that was in there at some point as well. That James talked a lot about the forward slope and are we going uphill and downhill? We can measure that fairly accurately with the GPS slope and show that to you in your data. What we can't do so much is the banking of the corners, right? The camber, and when it starts to fall off or when it adds it, we can see it sometimes in the lateral G's and some other things. But that is the one that's a little bit harder to see in the data. But James talked about that quite a bit as well.
And Roger, what's the difference between the GPS slope and the GPS altitude? That's one of our questions.
Good question, and I see you brought it up. GPS altitude is a value and it's showing us in meters what the track elevation is. That one is almost always substantially less accurate than the slope, because the altitude it's taking every 1/10 of a second, telling us what elevation we think you are on the face of the earth, where the slope is taking the altitudes of the 2 previous points and just goes back 1/10 of a second and ahead 1/10 of a second, and it tells us how big of a change it was in altitude. So while the altitude can have a little bit of float just with GPS inaccuracy, the slope takes away a lot of that inaccuracy, because the inaccuracy is on all different points of the altitude itself, right? So then we're doing the math in between the two. So that's why we use slope as our identifier of how steep the track is going down or up, not the altitude, because the altitude can have a little bit of that GPS float. So there's the distinction with the difference.
Good deal. And Alan asks if we're able to determine grip levels or loss of grip in off-camber turns. And so I guess specifically speaking to camber, and I touched on this earlier. I think we're mainly talking about rise and fall of the road. I don't know how else would you pick that up, Roger? How else would you pick up lateral grip and camber gain loss?
What we're getting in the data, especially with our GPS-based sensors, is we're getting the end result of grip loss, right, or grip gain, and whether or not that is coming from, we can define it and see it with the slope numbers. We know if you had just packed into the corner because it's the grip all of a sudden went up because you started pounding the car into it, or the opposite. But what we can't do with the channels in some of these basic loggers is we have no way of knowing exactly what the track slope is. We got all sorts of lateral G's and some other things, but that's, we're getting some of that because of the lateral force, and a piece of that is the slope of the track. But so that one's very, very much difficult. That is one that we sensors would need to be got that are a little bit more complex than what we're talking about here. So.
And I'll tell you, even with my experience with cars that are heavily instrumented that do have that level, you've also typically gotten a driver at that level as well. And ultimately, I think it falls to the driver to know when, you know, an area in the track, with whether it be a concrete or dust or whatever it is, some loss of grip there, or whether we're specifically talking about line. You know, some of these turns, whether you would choose to be, if it's a cambered turn, whether you would choose to be in the camber of the turn or put that inside tire up on the curve, which loses a couple of degrees in camber and so forth. That starts to become a driver's decision. And you know, data again is a great way to look at that and make those decisions. You know, a lot of times we're looking at pro driver, am driver, fast driver, slow driver. When you're looking at data by yourself, it's usually my lap doing this and my lap doing this other thing. And so, you know, if that's a question that you have, do it a few times one way, then do it a few times the other way, and then look at the end result. And again, just make sure you're looking at the result through the whole sector of linked turns, you know, assuming that you're not just talking about the one turn, because as we've seen, and especially in the uphill S's here, the payoff may be further down the road, not right at the moment that you're making that decision.
And almost always is. What you've done, you know, the last 200 feet really has an effect on what you do almost all the way along. So, perfect. Let's jump over. You guys have done a great job of throwing your questions and answers. We've tried to hit a little bit more earlier and fill more in, so we won't have a ton of ones coming here at the end. Just a couple of quick ones as I transition. I'm going to transition over back to the presentation, and let's go here, and we're going to hit a little bit more on. Come on, baby. Well, the technology is fighting us a little bit here today. Come on. Yeah. The questions and answers is where we were going to head next. Let's see if I can get that to actually play here in a moment. When was the last time you updated the math channel spreadsheet? I do tweak it, but the math channels haven't changed a ton. The one that we're talking about that I will send out to anybody, it's a spreadsheet plus the import export files of that you can bring math channels in, and some of the ones you've seen today, and gosh, probably 30 or 40 different math channels, some based for solos only, GPS only data loggers, and ones that have other channels. So when you send me that, we will send that out to you. I don't update it a ton. Maybe I tweak it here and there, but I don't change the dates or anything like that. So where would you use the gyro channels, both internal GPS and internal? The GPS based ones it's the gyro channel. It's one we did not talk about today, but it is a degree of rotation of the car, and the internal ones are sensor based. So there's a lot of noise and a lot of harmonics and a lot of vibration, and what we might call it, you know, a noisy trace. Where the GPS based one is telling you that, hey, you're rotating that car 5 degrees per second around this corner, and it's doing it with the math the same way we just talked about with the slope. So while they're both useful, that the internal ones got probably a little bit more accurate and a little bit more spiky. You can see exactly when it rotated, but there's a lot more noise in it. So I tend to use the GPS based ones to start, and if I see something I don't understand, I bring across some of the other data sources that we have. So okay, let me see one more try on this, see if I can get this to move. And let me jump out of that then and try that. Let me share the actual document. Maybe that will help me get where I want to go. Let's try that. There we go. We've been answering questions and answers as we went, so I think we're not going to spend a ton more time at that one. The training and support is just one of the things that I like to chat about a little bit here. AIM does just a ton of different things, and you know, and these webinars are one of them. What I'd like to do is add another poll real quickly on future webinar topics. Let's launch that. And these you can multiple choice and grab any of those that you think or you'd like to share, and I'll share that here in just a moment. I'm going to, while you guys are doing that, I noticed what I did to create the problem, so I'm going to try to not do that again. let's do this. Let's do this while you guys are answering those questions. Okay. And then when we get to that point, let's end that polling. It looks like it's kind of slowed down. Let's end the polling and let's go ahead and share those results. Give you an idea of what everybody is asking for. You've noticed that the last 3 or 4 webinars that we've been hosting, that we've been trying to jump in a little bit deeper based on these poll results. Data analysis has been a big thing, not just talking about the functions themselves, but actually chatting about how do we, how are we actually using the software to help find speed by you looking at actual data analysis questions, not necessarily how to work the functions themselves. So we're weaving that in a little bit, but the data analysis is still a big chunk. 75%. For the last 2 or 3 track maps have been right up there, and so we're adjusting some of the stuff that's coming up, and we're actually going to talk a little bit about track maps. What are the difference in track maps, and how do we build them and use them, and all of that stuff. So we are watching what you guys are chatting about there. So keep that in mind, and appreciate all of the votes. It's been very helpful to us. Okay, let me see if I can get this to slide up just a couple. I'm gonna try to maybe not go out. Well, let's try it one more time, just because I'm a glutton for punishment. The training videos. Every time that we finish one of these webinars, we put them out onto the LearnFast e-training video site on YouTube. So hopefully within an hour, sometimes maybe it's a couple of hours, but fairly quickly. If you know of anybody that misses the live ones, or you need to go back, we go through a lot of information in a big hurry, and when we understand that, but we also know that you have the option of going back and opening up the video and play the recording, slow it down, have your own data up running off to the side, and attempt to kind of follow along with what we're doing. So not only are these videos there, but tons of other functional videos are out there on the YouTube site. So keep that in mind. Customer support, we talk about it quite a bit, but I always like to say that we are a customer support company that happens to sell racing electronics. The guys, many of the guys you see down here they've been answering questions all day and chatting with you, and when you call the 800 numbers, these guys are talking with you, and you see us out at the track. So all of us here at AIM are working really hard and to be as good as we can right now on the phones and with these kind of things, but all of us are looking forward to getting back out there at the track and seeing you and all of the rest of our friends out at the track. So we do have another webinar coming up on Thursday, just in a couple of days, and it's going to be another one that is maybe just a little bit deeper into the analysis package, but we're going to approach it in a way that hopefully makes it nice and easy to understand. And we're gonna attack finding your apex. One of the things that as new users come out there and start to run around the track, or even people that are experienced but they're visiting a new track, and you always have that question: maybe this particular corner, does it really help with an early apex or a late apex? Or we're going to be focusing with Jeremy Lucas from Fast Tech on some data from Mid-Ohio, and this is going to tie in so well with what James just talked about. You've got the couple of corners at Mid-Ohio where you start the corner and you're going uphill, and you have to apex it correctly because the backside of the hill, the track is falling off. So you got to get a lot of that turning done early, and being able to understand how you've attacked that with your late apex or early apex, and the slope of the road, and understanding why that's happening will be very, very powerful. So Jeremy's going to chat with us about that, finding the apex, and we're going to use a corner radius math channel to do that, and we're going to be able to dig in and see exactly where you're driving the car based on the track, and look forward to seeing that. We're all going to have a good time with that. As we kind of close this up, we've got a contact page here at the end. We've got, of course, my information, email right there. If you want those math channel functions, drop me an email. I've got a little package that I can stick together real quickly and email it out to folks. So ask for that. I'll send it to you. James has been a real help here. This is his second one. There's his contact information. James has been good enough to also make available the information, this data files that we've been looking at, Bimmer World 1 and 2. If you want to follow along with this video, also write James or myself an email asking for the data from the Bimmer World topics that we've talked about, these last two certainly, and we will send you the data files from these two files as well. So keep that in mind. Again, James, thank you very much for helping us out. It's been wonderful. Yes, it's been VIR and one of the greatest places on earth, obviously, but this bit of information will work at everywhere. You talked about Road America, certainly Sonoma and CODA, and there's a lot of tracks where you've got these elevation changes that people can work their data around and get there a lot quicker. So thank you very much, James. I appreciate it. Thanks to all of the AIM guys. James, you have anything you'd like to close out with as we're on the way out?
One of the questions on chat is about that article on shifting. Whether it be that or anything else, my email address is there. Shoot me an email and I'll get your response. And whether it be data, BMWs, driving in general, I got some time right now while we're off from racetracks, and happy to share what I know.
If anybody wants a link to that article, certainly it's on the aimsports Facebook page. I believe it's been linked on the Bimmer World Facebook page as well. And if you can't find it there, or just drop us an email, either one of us an email, we'll send you a link to it as well. So thank you everybody for helping us. Thank you all for coming. Hope everybody is healthy and dealing with this whole process as well as we can right now. So look forward to seeing you all back out at the racetrack soon, and certainly we'll see you next Thursday with Jeremy and talking about another subject. Talk to you guys soon. Bye-bye.